Okay, I'm going to go through the steps to hand graph this trig function. You can see it's got kind of everything that at this point we can deal with, including a reflection. So when we start this, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this equation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that 2 out inside and make this 2 times x minus 3 pi over 2. This way I can see my period. So when I look at this, my vertical shift is -3. I'm going to go down 3. This tells me I have a reflection. And then this, so my amplitude is 1/2. So I'm only going to go from -1/2 to 1/2. And this is actually going to be adjusted. I'm not going to go because the vertical shift is going to adjust that. I'm going to actually go down -3 on, -1. When I rewrote it, I decided that, hey, let's see here. I decided for whatever reason I was changing a number in there. I'm like, that's just weird. Okay, there we go. I wondered where I got that 3. My imagination. Anyways, so this would be the original one of the amplitude before the adjustment, but of course it's going to be adjusted. So this is actually going to go from -1 1/2 to -1/2 because I went down. Each of these dropped by -1. But anyways, that's my amplitude. My period, my b, is 2, which means my period is 2 pi divided by 2, or pi. And then my horizontal shift, or my phase shift, is 3 pi over 2, and I'm going to the right because this is negative and we go against the sign. So this is a downward shift out here because vertical shifts go with the sign, but horizontal shifts or phase shifts go against the sign. So rather than going left like you might originally think, I'm actually going right. Okay. I got it to delete, but it doesn't like deleting. Okay. So now that we have all this information, to graph it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in chunks. So I'm going to first start by just doing the cosine graph. I'm not going to worry about anything else. So the basic cosine graph over one period, and that's all I'm going to worry about. I'm just going to ask you for one period, and it doesn't matter which period, goes from 1 to -1, and it starts up high. It's going to go down, up, and end up high, okay? And these are the 5 points you want, okay? And these are the 5 points we're going to be moving along with, okay? Now, you could certainly make an XY chart and do it all that way, but we're going to go through the steps. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the reflection because it's easiest for me to do it right now, so I'm just going to flip this upside down. And so I'm still at the same places, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And I'm still going from 1 to -1, but now I'm going this way. So now I look like that. Okay, so at this point I'm building this. Then I'm going to do next, I am going to deal with my amplitude. So my amplitude is going to change this. Now I'm going to go from 1/2 to -1/2, but I'm still at pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi in my one period. And I'm still, now I've already done my reflections. And I usually put in my points just because then it makes it easier to trace. There we go. I've got my one nice little hump. Okay. Then my next step is I'm going to do, since I just did this and changed the y, I might as well do my vertical shift. So I'm going to move every point down -1. So I'm going to move down 1. So now I'm going from -1/2 to -1/2, but I'm still at pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. Okay, but now I'm going to start down here and I'm going to, this is -1, this is my middle, so where 0 was now is 1, okay? and then here, and then here, and then here. So this looks like this. Okay. So I've moved down, and if it helps you draw in that one, okay. Now the next thing I've got to do is, so at this point, coming back up here and looking at this, what have I dealt with? Well, I moved it down, -1, I flipped it over, I changed the amplitude. Okay, I've got to change the period. So now I want to kind of shrink this. So my period now is only pi. So my period now is pi. So I've got to make this smaller. So here's my graph. I'm going to put it up here. So now I want pi over 4, and then pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and pi. Okay? And here's my -1/2, my -1, my -1.5. Okay? And now I'm going to start down here, come up to here, 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 back here. So there's my nice hump. Okay, so that now adjust. So now if I was to stretch this out to 2 pi where I was, I'd have 2 complete cycles of this, 2 periods within that original 2 pi. So I've scrunched this all down. The last thing I have to adjust for is I need to adjust for my phase shift. So each of these points up here, I need to add 3 pi over 2 to. So I have 0, because that's also on my, it's one of my 5 points there, and I'm adding 3 pi over 2, so that was nice and easy. Then I have pi over 4 plus 3 pi over 2, so that's going to make that 7 pi over 4. Got to make those common denominators. And then I've got pi over 2 plus 3 pi over 2, which is 4 pi over 2, or 2 pi. Then I have 3 pi over 4 plus 3 pi over 2, which is really 6 pi over 4, so 9 pi over 4. And then finally pi, or 2 pi over 2 plus 3 pi over 2, which gives me 5 pi over 2. So now when I go to graph this, okay, I'm going to kind of give myself a little thing. I'm going to start out here at 3 pi over 2, and then I have, and actually I think, hold on a second. It does not like the fact I want to erase. I want to put these up on top just to make it easier to see, because I know all my points are going to go on the bottom. Okay, so 3 pi over 2, and then this is 7 pi over 4, 2 pi, 9 pi over 4, and 5 pi over 2. Okay, and then over here, -1, -1/2, -1, -1.5. So now I'm going to put my points in here. So I'm starting all the way down here, and then I get to go up, 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 and then back down. So then my graph looks like that. So that's my final graph over a period. Obviously, I could extend it out to 2 periods if I wanted, etc. But as you're doing this, you're building through all the steps. Obviously, the order you do it in doesn't matter. I find I like to do the phase shift last, just in the period, because they tend to be the messiest. I can build everything else in first. But it's whatever makes the most sense to you. And it's also going to depend on the graph and how many pieces there are, as well as where it's going. You could certainly make an XY chart and simply pick the points. I'm not going to be too fussy. As long as you have a full period, it doesn't matter what these 5 points are. You know, the original function, we use 0 through 2 pi, and we use the 4 major stops, really of the unit circle. But certainly, as these adjust, you're going to get different ones, and it just depends on which ones you want to use. You could have brought this back if you wanted to stay closer to the y-axis, but I like to just add it to it or subtract it, because then I find it's easier for me to set it up. But hopefully this helps you go through the steps of doing it by hand.